What excites me about aviation is the way that it connects people. It's so cool how so many different people from so many different backgrounds can all come together for one thing and celebrate it. I think that's pretty cool.
What excites me about aviation is the potential to advance our understanding of science and engineering in flight. So to get a better understanding of how things interact with the environment, exploring new technologies is very exciting to me.
So let's see, what excites me about aviation? I think there are a lot of really exciting things happening right now. Things like unleaded avgas, electric aircraft, all those things are really exciting to me.
What excites me about aviation is probably just the freedom and the community. The general aviation community especially is super tight-knit and super friendly, and it's unique to anything else.
That you've given us has been incredible. How the parts are made and the composites from layers of fabric into an entire airplane. I thought that was really, really cool to see.
I think the best part of the aviation manufacturing experience has probably just been all the flying we've been getting to do.
It was a great learning experience for all of us on the team. We learned a lot about the flight test process, the design process, basically everything that goes into designing and testing an airplane.
I've enjoyed meeting the people who build the aircraft. That's not something that everyone gets to do. It's interesting to see how they all come from different backgrounds and they all are trying to do things, one, for the product, but also for themselves and for the people around them, the community in general. It's really interesting and really inspiring to see how everyone's working to make it possible, but at the same time, they're working to make it more than what is possible.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to GAMA's 2022 State of the Industry press conference. My name is Andre Castro. I am the Director of Communications for GAMA. I'd like to quickly go over today's schedule. We'll start with the 2021 Shipments and Billings report. That will be followed by some industry updates. We're then hosting an industry panel a panel discussion with industry leaders. and then we'll follow it up by Q&A. And then we're honored today to have FAA Administrator Steve Dixon here for a special announcement. I'd like to now go ahead and introduce our next set of panelists. I have GAMA Chairman and President and CEO of Embraer Executive Jets, Michael Malfitano, and GAMA President and CEO, Pete Bunce.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you all of you for being here in person. Doesn't it feel great to be together again? I remember the last time we were in this room and we had some real special conversations, and we have a lot of great topics to talk about today in regards to the strength of our industry and our community. I do want to take the opportunity, as Andre mentioned, to thank FAA Administrator Steve Dixon to be here. It's an honor to have you with us, and your team did a fantastic job with our meetings today at GAMA offices. So part of the job is the opportunity to showcase the results of the industry, and it's always nice to have good results and be here to share those results with you. I have the privilege of wearing two hats, as noted. One is the CEO of Embraer, so I have a little bias towards the business jet community, of course, as well as recognizing that I am the chair of GAMA, and it's a privilege to be the chair, following big shoes with Nicolas Chabert and several others that are here with us as past chairman. It's an exciting opportunity to showcase what this industry can do through GAMA's efforts on the Hill. 120 companies make up GAMA, and world's leading manufacturers, avionics, components, which you'll hear some information on today, rotorcraft, engines. There's a lot of new technologies and services, especially as we look forward in 22 and beyond for innovations in advanced air mobility, eVTOL electrification. So this industry makes up, and this association makes up the pulse of the future of air ecosystem travel. And we're very excited to see where the industry has resulted for 2021. So the next slide is jumping into the numbers, and you'll see we've consolidated the slides. Instead of having lots of data on 3 or 4 different slides regarding a segment, we've captured it all on one slide. It makes it easier for folks that are especially in the audience, in the media, that are going to be reporting on this in the days ahead. So the first up is Piston Airplanes. We're starting there to show a huge increase in this segment, 5.5%, which is very significant, especially when you look at the entire chart, which if you look at all the way far on the left, you'll see 2010 to 2021. That's almost a 6.1% compound annual growth rate during that period. Nice to see the rebound. The significant increase in terms of billings, which is now up 13.7% to $837 million. The market share continues to be North America concentrated, along with Asia Pacific, and this is really exacerbated when you look at the training marketplace, which has been a big driver in regards to that growth annually. Let's move on to turboprop. Turboprop airplanes. On this chart, you'll see that the shipments are up 19% over 2020. This is a little bit tougher going, so it's back to the pre-pandemic levels. Obviously, it's important to understand that we're starting to see that real growth. But what's interesting about this is it's much more diverse across the utility diversity marketplace in the segment. The largest market share continues to be North America. Interesting, in this case, Latin America overtook both Europe and Asia, and now takes second place in the position at the $1.8 billion billing rate. 32% increase over 2020. Let's move on. Business jets. Business jets, we see shipments are increased 10.2%. There's several prognosticators in the room that had that somewhere between 6 and 8% throughout the year. It's nice to see that we actually exceeded expectations in terms of that sector. Strong recovery driven by not only new users and new buyers. Flight traffic is up significantly. Steady growth is continuing with the OEM backlogs that will carry far beyond 2022. So there's great growth in this segment, $19 of billings, 5.6% increase over the prior year, but you can see we're not quite yet back to the pre-pandemic levels of 2019. North America is a big focus point here. 66% of the market share is in North America, and if you factor in myself and the peers in this space, the backlogs would tell even a stronger story about North America in terms of the concentration that it possesses. We have, the next slide shows a very interesting chart that breaks the segments down by the weight of the aircraft. And we show that specifically in business jets as a comparison, especially to the last down cycle, the global financial crisis. In the global financial period just after 2008, the 2009 period and shortly thereafter was always a top-down recovery. You saw the large cabin, heavier aircraft recover first. Take a look at this chart. You recognize that it's evenly spread across all weight segments. So you're seeing activity across the entire spectrum recover quite nicely. You didn't see that in the last crisis. This is driven not only by buyers of aircraft, but obviously users of a lot of the models that have been created since the financial crisis in terms of fractional, jet card, and social membership that is clearly driving that distribution across the segments. Very interesting. Let's move on to piston helicopters. We now see that piston helicopter shipments have increased 27.5% over 2020. That's on par, again, with the pre-pandemic levels of 2019. And billings are up to 80 million in piston aircraft, 31.4%. Exciting to see this recovery. As we move on to turbine powered, these are preliminary numbers. Leonardo does not report until later in the month of March, so we don't yet have a full view of what this segment has to offer. We did do a comparative here, so you'll see that chart in 2020 has a little shaded area that represented what was reported by Leonardo last year. This is an apples and apples comparison to that dark blue section that shows the numbers are recovering, increased 25% over 2020. And probably higher once you have factored in the fourth quarter results from Leonardo. $3.6 billion in billings for turbine helicopters. And for the first time in a while, we've had the pleasure on this last chart to highlight the avionics report. And we want to congratulate the Aircraft Electronics Association. And I believe that we have our guest Mike Adamson here for the CEO. Hey, Mike, how are you? Congratulations to you on the efforts of a great year. Highlighted here are some key factors: $2.3 billion in sales, 6.5% increase total year over last year. Interesting to see that happen in about 50-50 split. 55% of it is in retrofit, in terms of retrofit market, and the balance in forward fit. 6 consecutive quarters in a row you've seen this growth. Very exciting to see this segment continuing to have that kind of results. We think it's driven a lot by what happened with ADS-B mandates that happened in the years past that have led to that resurgence in bringing aircraft to the marketplace, especially now when you have a lot of the pre-owned marketplaces aircraft that has been depleted in strength of this last year. So great news from our teams in avionics. I think that covers the facts and data. The information will be available for publication by GAMA today, and I'd like to now turn to Pete for some specific industry updates. Pete?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, my staff gets nervous because they never know what I'm going to say up here, and I don't follow the script, and this is a little bit of a departure from it. But we recently heard the announcement that our administrator was going to take a well-deserved retirement to go back home with his family. And I have to tell you, I was there in the Senate Commerce room during his confirmation hearing. And when Administrator Dixon said the MAX is not going to be returned to service till I fly it, I knew that very second that he was going to get confirmed, but also that it's the strong leadership that we want to have in the FAA. And then there were just a few challenges thrown at him over that period of time. And we all know the most recent one, but just think about it. You know, you got commercial space. You have to build back confidence with other authorities. You have to sit there and have a change of administration, retirements of very senior people that have been in that administration for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, even though we've been telling the FCC for years and years, both industry and the FAA, what was going to happen when we went live with 5G, all of a sudden it became a crisis. And that strong leadership managed us through that. So, Administrator Dixon, I just want to tell you, I know I speak for all my colleagues and our whole industry, thank you. No one deserves being able to go back and spend time with your family more than you, and we are going to greatly miss you at the helm of the FAA. Thank you very much. Well, just to recap, since the last time we got together virtually a year ago, if you look at the GAMA memberships that we had over the period of time, it's been very interesting. We have a company that not only supplies structure for large business aircraft, but they also refurbish World War II aircraft. We've got a company that now is certifying with Part 23 a large drone using the same standards that we use for manned aircraft. We've got two of the greatest iconic companies in rotorcraft as new members of GAMA, and we even have a very well-positioned automotive company that's into advanced air mobility. So we're all in every segment of aviation and manufacturing and maintenance there. So we're very proud that this association keeps growing, and then the relationships that we grow with the authorities across the globe. If you look at what we were able to do in the last year, first of all, I'd like to do is look east. Let's look up across the pond for a second. We were able, earlier in the year, with working with my great friend Arthur from EBAA, to be able to launch this European Business SAF Summit. And really, that was the time that we were able to go and make sure that European decision makers knew that business aviation was leading the way on SAF. Obviously, we have to be in full partnership with our commercial brethren, but there are a lot of things that this industry can do at the forefront of SAF that just we have an ability because of who our customers are that fly our aircraft. And so we're very proud of the success of that one. We went and were able to work the industry safety management system, and EASA is more nimble on rulemaking, so we are able to start with refreshing what we want to do in SMS for manufacturing and maintenance, and be able to work with EASA on their rulemaking, and now we take it back over to this side of the pond to be able to go and fulfill what we want to do on safety management systems. We were appointed to the EU Drone Leaders Group, and over in Europe, EU Drone Leaders means advanced air mobility. So they asked GAMA to be a part of that. We're very excited. We also launched with EASA what we call General Aviation EU website. Notice GAMA colors on that logo there, but our partners at EASA have been fantastic, and this is a one source where you go to know where jobs are, where factories are, where airfields are, and opportunities for GA in Europe. Then, at the end of the year, we launched Aviol, which means Aviation for All. The European Commission took great interest in this because what it does is it advances diversity and inclusion in all of the aviation sectors in Europe. And we're very proud that DG Transportation really wanted to play a role and listen to this and be part of what we're doing. And then finally, launching the European General Aviation Survey, which is very important because we're now providing EASA and those in Europe their own safety data, which they didn't have before. And we launched this with our partners, with Mark's group at the International AOPA Association, along with Errol Friedrichshafen, to be able to really get good data which we can make safety decisions in Europe. If you go over now, and let's focus on this side of the Atlantic, let's take a look at what we were able to do. The dynamic regulatory system doesn't sound like much. It would make sense that you could go one-stop shop for rules, regulations, policy, advisory circulars, and that. But really, this was called for back in 2013 and work with the FAA Reauthorization Act then, and it took 8 years to be able to bring it across. But now we can go to one single source, everyone can, to be able to go and source very important data that helps manufacturing and maintenance move forward, and also on the operational side. We were able to talk at a congressional hearing about the importance of preserving our workforce. We all have heard about the Great Resignation. And what was so important to us is we needed to keep each and every one of those members in our factory, our technicians, our engineers, everyone, we need to keep them working. But the money right during the early stages in the first year of the pandemic just wasn't there. So we were able to plant the seeds, and we got it across the goal line with the Aviation Manufacturing Job Protection Act. And what the result of that was is $673 million paid out in a partnership with industry to preserve that workforce, and we actually have 593 companies take advantage of that. So we are very proud to pioneer and champion that up on the Hill. Certification process guide to be able to work with the FAA on oversight and be able to have a guide where entrants can come in and look at how they want to certify aircraft. And then, of course, a lot of us were at NBA base where we rolled out the business and aviation commitment to climate change. And again, what I'm so proud in that effort is that competitors all got together on the manufacturing side and said, how are we going to plot our future? Can we meet net zero by 50? And if so, how are we going to do it? How are we going to bring in technologies? When are they going to be mature? When can we field them? And it was just a Herculean effort, and I'm so proud of what happened. Then finally, as we get into December, we as an industry screwed up. We didn't pay attention collectively, everybody across the board, we didn't pay attention to the fact that the 31st of December was going to be a federal holiday because it ended up being on a Friday. And we had to deliver aircraft, we had to process aircraft on the used side, and we said, oh my God, what are we going to do? We went to the FAA, and Mr. Administrator Christopher Chalou and his team did yeoman's work to help us be able to keep that registry open, and we basically delivered $250 million of product in that last 2 days of the year. So thank you to your team for helping us out. So now let's look at what's ahead of us. The administrator's favorite topic, 5G. We've got to move away from now the discussion of mitigations, although we're still working on it for business aircraft and especially for rotorcraft. But we need to talk now about solutions. And as I've heard Minister Dixon say, this is not going to be a quick process. We've got to be able to certify our equipment to be able, whether it's inline filters or what we are going to do as more and more 5G capability stands up. Other companies other than AT&T and Verizon deploy it, increase power levels in that. We've got to provide the solutions. And this is going to be a process where we have to work very closely with the FAA to be able to do much like what we did with ADS-B and put a lot of focus on being able to certify that to be able to find solutions. And we're all working together toward that. Environmental sustainability, again, becomes very important. There were important things in Build Back Better that taught, especially like the blender's fuel tax credit and other things, to be able to meet the grand challenge of producing enough SAF in the time that we need it. That wedge for SAF, as we look toward our environmental commitments, starts to get very big in a not too distant future. We have to have this, and we've got to keep working it. We've got to work with our allies on the Hill to be able to get that across the goal line. As we look at innovation and mobility, we're championing the Advanced Air Mobility Act that's up on the Hill right now. We've got great support on both the House and Senate, bipartisan support. I expect it to be another one of those bills that we've championed that is going to pass overwhelmingly when we get it across the goal line. And it really allows the Department of Transportation and the FAA to be able to bring in all of the elements of the government to be able to say, okay, what do we need to do collectively to advance this industry? And we're very excited about being able to do that. Implementing the certification reforms and the oversight that came out of legislation as a result of the MAX is extremely important to our industry. We worked on that very closely with the administrative staff this morning. We have a lot of good solutions out there, as well as strengthening our bilateral relationships. The amount of activity that we're putting at, whether it's the FAA, ANAC in Brazil, Transport Canada, EASA, the UK CAA, is starting to overwhelm the people that they have being able to work those processes. And if we don't rely on our bilaterals to leverage each other's safety competency and focus on the differences, safety critical items, or where we have to train folks that are new to any one of those agencies to regulate us, then we're just wasting time. And we're wasting effort and we're slowing the industry down. And so we've really got to focus on that. Policy and guidance backlog is very, very important to us. Again, we emphasize that with Billy Nolan, the new head of aviation safety at the FAA. The backlog is increasing. And we know that the rule of rules was done away with early on in this administration. That was imposed during the last administration. But once that was removed, we weren't able to clear the backlog of policy and guidance that allows us to do our jobs. We can't do things and deliver product and new technologies and safety enhancing capability unless we have policy and guidance that allows us to do that. And we're working with the FAA to be able to free that up. And then, of course, workforce. Absolutely paramount. We spent a lot of time this morning talking about both the workforce in the FAA and our other authorities, but the workforce in our industry. It is very critical right now, and we've got to figure out ways to recapitalize this workforce, reach out to young people, work on work immigration issues so we can go and tap expertise that may reside in other countries that are not our bilateral partners, to bring them in to be able to go and fill the roles and work on that backlog that Michael talked about just a little while ago. So that is something very important to us, and we're going to be working on hard. The last thing I want to touch on before we go to our panel is I want to talk about this infrastructure here. Look at that map. Look at the infrastructure that we created basically in the 40s with World War II and all the training that we did there. No place on the planet has this infrastructure. We passed an bipartisan infrastructure bill to emphasize the importance of infrastructure to this nation. This nation, the United States, is an aviation nation. We will never build the railroads like China can, where they move towns and everything else. We just don't have an ability to build that, or like Europe has. This is our infrastructure that we've got to preserve. And it's under attack by a lot of towns using a lot of excuses to try to close down airports. We need to keep every single one of those airfields out there, because what we do is so critical, not only for the economic vitality of this country, but if you look at the next slide, think about firefighting. Think about EMS, where a lot of those helicopters are based at one of our airfields and then go downtown. They may not be at a hospital center because they're transporting people to that burn center that may be a long distance away. Rescue, disaster relief, all of that comes from this great infrastructure that we built here in the United States. And then, if you go to the next slide and talk about great organizations like Corporate Angel Network that just recently celebrated 40 years. And the amount of passengers, during that time, 66,000 passengers, cancer treatment folks that we've been able to get to hospitals, or Veterans Airlift Command celebrating 15 years, transporting over 20,000 veterans and their families to critical medical care with over 8,000 missions. That's our industry giving back. And then this year, coming up in June, we have a very special every 4 years event, which I have been able to participate in, that I want to highlight because it's just one of those things that makes your heart sing when you're on the ramp, being able to see. And a lot of the GAMA members in this company fly in the Special Olympics Airlift. And I want you to just take a look at this very short video about what this is all about. Can you roll it, please?
The journey continues here. Welcome over 800 athletes coming in today on the Cessna Citation Special Olympics Airlift. There are over 102 planes that are landing every 90 seconds here.
So this used to be called Citation Special Olympics. Now it's all Textron aircraft, but if you can be a part of this, it's going to be exciting. Peyton Manning will be there on the ramp greeting folks, and it's just one of the greatest things we can do. So with that, I'd like to conclude this portion, and I'd like to ask Maria Della Posta, who handles and is chairman of our GAMA Communications Committee, and also her day job is president of Pratt & Whitney Canada, to be able to convene our expert panel, to be able to dive into some of these issues that I teed up. Maria?
Thank you, Pete. And, Michael, I couldn't agree more. It's so nice to see everybody in person finally. And I want to thank everybody that's here today to support us and our industry. I think it was self-evident through all of COVID that this industry really came together to fill so many gaps, from emergency medical to personal travel and everything in between, cargo, and such a critical part of all of aviation. So with that, we have a great panel group today, starting with Michael Amalfitano. I'd invite Michael to come up and join me. Michael is President and CEO of Embraer and also chairman of our GAMA committee this year. So we're very, very happy to have Michael with us. Eric Hinson next. Eric is GAMA vice chair. So next year you get to lead the way, Eric. We're happy about that. And also CEO of Simcom International. I'd invite Omer Baryohai to come and join us. Please, founder and board member of Aviation. Delightful. And of course, Phil Straub, please, Executive Vice President and Managing Director of Aviation at Garmin International. Great, great organization. So again, thank you to all the panelists for being here today. So we have a few really great topics to talk about. Hopefully you'll find them interesting, and then Pete will take us through some Q&A where we can continue the discussion. So I'd like to start the discussion. We just got to see the report on all the deliveries, very exciting. But maybe, Michael, can you give your perspective on what you see as an aircraft manufacturer? How is the industry doing?
Thanks, Maria. It's doing fantastic. It's kind of exciting to see the numbers that we had a chance to distribute today. The health of the industry is driven by several factors that I think demonstrate the strength of that industry. And it always starts with demand, and the demand was absolutely off the charts during the pandemic period, especially in 2021. You had new users flooding the marketplace. That is a strength to the base of the industry. You had new buyers coming into the marketplace for the first time, specifically in the jet category, but across all the segments. And as the charts showed, you saw upticks in every area over 2020. The drivers that are supporting that high net worth individual growth, the economies are very strong, both in the United States and globally. You have huge demand that is in not only the new aircraft, but the pre-owned aircraft marketplace as well, which is at record low levels, at single-digit percentages that you can't even find an airplane in the marketplace. And that's allowed the OEMs to have a much stronger opportunity to balance units and pricing discipline to support the strength of the industry going forward. And that's an important dynamic in terms of the metrics of not only 2021, but as you look forward into 2022 and beyond. So there's some real key drivers in terms of flight activity. There was a rebound in flight activity that was driven mainly by leisure. You saw that in the charter market, and the charter rates have increased as a result of that. That strengthens the market. You saw it in fractional and jet card and the social member programs, that there was an influx of new users that were flying potentially commercially or not at all and came into private aviation. And the nice thing about it is that there's a good stickiness to that group of individuals that has come into that space. So now that you're starting to see it transition from the leisure marketplace across the global and more focused on corporate initiatives, and you'll start to see the corporate flight departments who started to come back in the fourth quarter of 21 continue to do that in 2022. Some of that's driven by tax policies, right? So you have a lot of the focus on bonus depreciation that might be coming to an end in 2026 if it's not renewed. You have different transitions between the Trump administration and the Biden administration in terms of tax policy. These are all drivers to decision timing that might have accelerated aircraft purchases in 2021 over waiting to the future marketplace in terms of taxes. A lot of good drivers in the metrics and a very bright future in terms of aviation. And I think you saw that not just in business jets, you saw that in turbine aircraft, piston aircraft, helicopters, and so it's nice to see it being spread across the marketplace in each of the categories. And then lastly, I think you have to also look at, while that strength is there, we have to recognize there are some bottlenecks and there are some headwinds. In this particular case, we happen to find ourselves with a demand problem, meaning you're pacing it so fast, supply cannot keep up in certain characteristics in the marketplace, whether that be logistics, of physically just not getting what you need to produce your product, or also in terms of commodity pricing. So things are costing more, whether you see it in the chip industry, semiconductor sealants, titanium, magnesium, aluminum, and the list goes on, that is being pressured right now because of that sort of outsized demand that's in the marketplace. So I think that's the headwind we'll have to manage through. There's a lot of economic issues related to inflation that is more global, and the Fed interest rates raising and things that we have to manage more as an economy and as a country. Here in the United States. The North American marketplace is by far still the strongest. You saw that in each of the categories, whether it was helicopters, turbines, piston, and jets. So we're a big part of that infrastructure that Pete had highlighted in terms of the strength of what we need to do to continue working together to grow the marketplace. So I would say how things are faring at the OEM level in general is very strong. Backlogs are anywhere from a year to two and even longer out. And so that gives a good strength to the future in regards to 2022, 2023. Most of the OEMs are looking at selling aircraft into 2024. That's a very exciting opportunity for the industry.
You know, Michael, I think the key, thanks for sharing that, very broad insight on the industry as a whole. And I think the important thing is that the demand as we see it, the durability of that demand, I think is coming from, new entrants, and we hope that will sustain over the long term. As the engine manufacturer who powers quite a number of the aircraft in this segment, I think we are seeing that same high double-digit growth, obviously, that you talked about. But what's particularly exciting is that despite all the challenges and all the, living through a pandemic, many of the airframers have continued to introduce new models, whether derivatives of existing models or new models. And I think that just speaks to what an incredible industry. Talk about resilience in that environment. But like you said, there are some challenges, and that's going to be the test. Are we able to overcome some of the, supply chain? We're living some of that ourselves. So I think we have an important task in front of us, so we make the best of this demand. Phil, we talked earlier about the Aircraft Electronics Association report, and obviously a lot of stands to reason that with all this demand, you're also seeing it in your sector. Is there anything in particular, however, as it relates to avionics?
Well, as Michael said, there's just strong demand across the industry. You mentioned across business aviation coming back or corporate travel. But what I'm really even excited about is if you look at social media, look at the diversity of the people you see coming into aviation. A lot of younger people, groups that have not been represented as well in the past. And so there is an appreciation for what general aviation can do. We look at kind of both the OEM, new production side, and the aftermarket. And Michael did a great job talking about the OEM side, book-to-bill ratios, great ratios there, booked out a long time. And the aftermarket side has similar demand, right? They want these new products, make flying safer, more accessible, and so forth. But there's a challenge with capacity out there. I think I saw in the AEA survey that over 80% of their members that do the installation work are they're either hiring now or will be hiring throughout this year. So there's a real demand for skilled folks that can install the equipment this way. And then if I look back, even with our own challenges, the supply chain is affecting everyone. So, we're all working very hard to mitigate those type of things, but the surprises that come up are real. And the accessibility or availability of some of the products, we have to schedule those out many months at times. So those are some of the headwinds, but it's great having this interest and demand in what we do. Absolutely. Yeah. Interest from different groups, new groups, is particularly, good for our sector. Eric, from your perspective, much has been said about the shortage of pilots and all this. What do you see in the pilot training sector?
Well, first off, we're a long ways from 18 months ago. 18 months ago, I think most of us in the training business saw our revenue pretty much cut in half in terms of the amount of activity. But the resilience of the market really has been impressive, and we saw a pretty significant recovery through 2020, but 21 was just exceptional. And of course, to meet all this demand that Michael and the rest of our OEMs are supplying us with from a training perspective, we need to make sure that there's an adequate supply of well-trained pilots. It's absolutely critical to the safety and to the infrastructure that we're continuing to grow and develop. So what I tell you about the recovery so far that's really impressive is it's across the board. We look at all the segments. Of course, we train in every one of them. But this isn't just, there's been fantastic growth, as Michael said, in the fractional markets as well as in the charter market. But also we're seeing the owner-pilot market. We're seeing significantly increased demand there. A lot of the legacy programs now are coming back. We're seeing a lot of people coming back and pulling airplanes that have been parked for a number of years. Those are going back into service, so we're doing a lot of initial training on some airplanes that are been well maintained and are ready to go back out there. So the question with respect to pilots, I'll talk about that perhaps a little later when we get into some of the workforce things. But overall, the demand is as much as we can handle right now from a training perspective. Actually, you just mentioned, it's incredible the aircraft that we see coming back into service. Yes. So that must be particularly challenging because you must have so much different training to give. And we do. We have some, fortunately, we have some instructors who've been with us for many
Thank
years
God.
and are intimately familiar with Cessna Conquests and 421s and all of the older equipment, but it's all coming back into service.
So, talking about the stuff coming back into service, obviously we are also an industry that ensures that, we're always keeping our eye on the horizon, and we're all very focused on ever more sustainable propulsion. Omer, talk to us a little bit about Alice and how that program is going.
Sure. First of all, I do like the Conquest. I don't think it's a bad thing.
That's right. There's nothing wrong with
it. But I think what we're seeing, and we kind of heard it from everybody, but we mostly saw it from the numbers. When the industry turns a corner, and it does, this year was a turn of a corner, it also looks into the future, and we see a lot of inbound because of this. We see a lot of new interest. We see a lot of flight departments, individual owners, and even major operators kind of renegotiating what their fleet looks like in 2025, 2026. Now, as was mentioned, if people are ready to buy their planes and get them in 2024, suddenly part of the AAM effort, as we call it, the Advanced Air Mobility effort, becomes relevant. Because if you look at a lot of those programs out there, 2024, 2025 is kind of the event horizon of where these first ones are going to come into service. That makes it a very interesting time to be for us. It obviously creates the pressures and imbalances of the workforce and the pilot and the training and the certification. It's all converging in there. And I think much like was said here, challenges like the supply chain challenge and challenges like what we see as an arms race of talent acquisition is true for everybody. It's true for the programs that are new and looking to be part of those charts in a few years to come. And it's obviously true for the friends here around the table. So I think it's happening all around, and we're definitely going to see some of this beginning to take a bite out of the order book, hopefully in the 24-25 timeframe.
What an incredible time. Scary on the one hand, but also a lot of opportunity, because we have the highest level of demand for, as we've seen in many, many years, at a time when we're going through some major transformation. So I think for anybody who's looking for an interesting industry to join, this would be it, I think.
For sure.
Pete talked a little bit about the importance of the regulatory side of the business and how much we rely on our regulatory partners. So maybe like to talk a little bit about that and how we've fared through this time and what we see as some of the critical needs for our sector. So maybe, Phil, I'll start with you. As we continue to grow, never losing sight of safety and quality, what do you think the opportunities and the challenges are from a regulatory perspective?
Well, opportunities are great to talk about because there are so much there. And when you look at, I'm going to talk again from our avionics perspective, look at the innovation that's going on there. And I always tell folks, as we talk about concepts like simplified vehicle operations, they're very much part of advanced air mobility, but they're also part of our traditional aviation aircraft as well. As a pilot, I can think about the simplification that's gone on throughout the generational development of these airplanes, and it's incredible. So what we need standards and performance standards. And, we've migrated from less prescriptive type things of this is how we do things or how you certify things to performance-based. But that doesn't obviate the need to have standards, minimum operational performance standards, consensus standards, things that industry and the regulators come together on and say, using our collective knowledge, these are the best ways or performance standards to have. And then what we need from the regulators then is kind of that nod saying, okay, we came together on these RTCA or SAE or ASTM type documents, and we're going to acknowledge those. And we're going to do that via the processes they have. We're going to use advisory circulars to say this is a means, not the only means of complying with this regulation. So those would be the opportunities I see to continue the technology which drives safety, which is the ultimate goal.
Michael, from an airframer's perspective, you've been very active with new aircraft and existing aircraft and working with all the countries. Where do you see some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thank you for acknowledging that. We have a unique situation with Embraer. We have the benefit of having certified 30 airplanes in the last 25 years across 3 businesses of executive aviation, defense and commercial. And we did that through the strength and support of having a very collaborative bilateral discussion with all of the regulatory bodies. We start with ANAC, and ANAC has a fantastic relationship with Administrator Dixon and the FAA team here in the United States, and that has allowed us to launch things very early on, getting the regulatory bodies involved in the strategy. And it led to triple certification of the E2 platform for commercial, or the triple certification of the Praetors. That happened because of bringing the teams together at a very early stage in the process. And we're approaching it the same way with advanced air mobility. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the new technologies and the innovations, as Omar had indicated as well. That's going to take that same kind of collaboration. And where we see the opportunity, as we heard it this morning when Pete was highlighting some of the conversations we had with Administrator Dixon's team, was that it's not just about certification. We seem to focus only on one aspect of the segment about new technologies. And we learned very much about, in the conversations, that it's about the operational challenges, not just the certification. And so, yes, okay, you have to get a type certificate, but you have to also get a production certificate, and you have to figure out how to get an operational protocol as well. And that involves air traffic management systems, especially as you start to think about filling the skies with urban air mobility and eVTOL activities. So the challenge that we see is about the backlog that all that new innovation and new technology has thrown at all the regulatory bodies, because this is at a similar to the jet age that we experienced after the wars. We are in the same scenario with what's happening in eVTOL, what's happening in electrification. And even beyond that, when you look at some of the sustainability topics that we'll talk about, you'll see things that are going to be even more regulatory needed, and it's going to come on the operational side of how you implement that safely. It's not going to be how you certify it. The certification process, from the conversations that we've been having with the FAA, is actually not the long pole in the tent. It's much more about the operational aspects and how that works together.
Right. Yeah, this morning with our colleagues from the FAA, we talked about the integration of all those pieces. And I would say that the other thing that's very important to us is, you mentioned ENAC in Brazil. Of course, we have Transport Canada, EASA, FAA. The FAA always playing sort of a central role in so many of our activities, and the importance of harmonization, because at a time when we are all trying to earn this demand, transform, look ahead to sustainable technologies, we really need all the parties to come together and leverage those bilaterals that have been so effective to advancing the industry up until now. I wonder, in the training sector, Phil, are you seeing similar things, or what's peculiar in your area?
No, thanks, Maria. On the training side, I mean, the point that Michael makes about the operational aspects of advanced air mobility and simplified vehicle operations, a regulatory process takes time. We all know that. We'd all like it to work faster than it does, but that's the reality of the regulatory environment. So we're going to live with the existing regulatory rules that we have today. So in terms of advanced air mobility, and as with respect to how we train pilots, we're largely going to have to live within the regulations as they're written today. And that's certainly achievable. But that shouldn't eliminate the effort that we should all make to find, because as I see some of the technology that's coming in some of these advanced air mobility vehicles and truly simplified vehicle operations, it really does sort of change the tenor of what training should look like. Mm-hmm. And we probably need to start working on it now, because we would like to have that ready by the time that the aircraft arrive. Yeah. I'd also like to make just one more quick point about the collaboration between the FAA and industry. I think that during the pandemic, we really saw some tremendous flexibility out of the regulatory industry, certainly from the training perspective, where people no longer had the ability to travel to training centers. We set up virtual ways that we could inspect simulators for their annual requalifications and so forth. And I thought it just proved how dynamic we can be with working with the FAA and industry to solve problems relatively near term, because they were near-term issues that we had to get resolved. So thank you, Administrator, for all your support on that.
Yeah, someone said earlier today, right, not only bad came out of COVID, I think many of us learned how to work in different ways, and we just need to carry that forward. We also discussed this morning that the certification process, Part 23 or others, the boundaries that define every section, right, from certification to have been there for decades and decades, and we know them very well. But in a advanced mobility environment, those boundaries change, right?
blur.
And so they blur, and the administration obviously needs to deal with, as we do, how do you operate in those blurred boundaries? I wonder, Omer, what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. I think there are definitely blurred boundaries, but it is our job, both as an industry and as a regulator and within this relationship, to create the pathway that allows for that avenue of certification. Now, as was said here very accurately, there is a huge difference between the Part 23 that was revamped, memory serves, in summer of 2017 by people sitting in this room, and created that ability, kind of opened the door to be more performance-based and to create all of these capabilities for the industry to influence the way certification bases and means of compliance are being defined, and then to get the buy-in from the regulator. That's great, but now the next step is to say, okay, now we can actually operate in this way, we can train in that way. There are more steps to be taken. And when we talk about this need to create, it's basically infrastructure. To create this infrastructure for innovation, we also need to see the FAA handle the backlog. In a way, it is our interest that the FAA has enough resources and gets it done, because these are the same people with the same learning curves that are going to do the buy-ins that we need for our standards. And I think this is really the heart of where the industry needs to go right now. The AAM effort, and by the way, the AAM bill will definitely be instrumental for that, and I'm very grateful for GAMA for pushing this again. But the whole idea here is the interagency ability to coordinate. The bills help for that, and we need to create those avenues to really allow for the next step in TCs, in PCs, in the training aspects, in the operational aspects throughout. Part 23 was a great start. It's not enough.
It's not enough. And like you said, this is a place where GAMA is front and center in helping to develop and or just encourage those pathways, as you described them, to evolve from where we are today to where we need to go tomorrow. So I think that's a great example of how industry can continue to play an important role. Maybe I just want to come back to you, Phil. You know, we talked about boundaries, and I watched you. Like, where do you see an example that could make it real for this community on how it plays out in your world?
In terms of you talking about the certification opportunities
and these
again?
boundaries.
Well, and maybe I'll pivot this time a little bit from the standards to working globally. So as we look at advanced air mobility and everything we're doing, we really want global aviation standards, and FAA, EASA, ANAC, Transport Canada are all leaders with bilateral agreements there. And so I think one of the opportunities I see that span from advanced air mobility to traditional is just to get back to those trusting working relationships we've had. We have very strong competence on all areas this way. And when we look at things, validations and so forth, we really need to focus on where there's differences in regulations, or maybe where regulations don't exist, and then certainly in areas that are safety critical. Because if we can do that, the regulators can do that, that allows them to devote the resource power to new technologies like advanced air mobility and help us there.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to pivot now to obviously a topic that's of interest and importance to all of us, and that is the notion of sustainability. And I think as an industry, we're committed to doing everything in our power to continue to introduce ever more sustainable propulsion. Pratt & Whitney, like the industry and many companies here today, have expressed their commitment towards those 2050 objectives, and I would venture to say that needs to be faster, but I think it's a good start. Omer, obviously you're playing a unique role in this area. Tell us how you see the advanced air mobility sector in this area.
I think electrification is definitely part of it, but it's not the whole picture. We still need to carry a lot of people, a lot of distance, and that's what you've seen in the numbers here is amazing. It means many, many millions of people are actually flying, and if you look at the commercial side, it's many billions of people actually flying, and they need to go the distance. And that doesn't get solved with batteries alone, at least not in the foreseeable future.
In time, perhaps.
I think what we're definitely seeing out there, though, is that turning the corner as an industry after COVID and creating this convergence of both new technology, new regulation, new efforts to get there, both on the sustainable aviation fuel front, on the hydrogen developments going forward, and on the, obviously, electrification and AAM effort to kind of create this infrastructure for this thing to happen, that's a great tide, and it will raise all ships. I think the advantage of hearing OEMs and people like the business jet makers come in there and say, by 2050, we're going to make a difference in the way we build our propulsion systems because we think it matters. That was huge. And the ability to create, to be even a small part in the building of these capabilities going forward is a great privilege. So it's a great time to be in aviation.
That's true. I couldn't agree more. Michael, you have you've expressed a clear mission at Embraer. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So in addition to obviously being part of the coalition, being part of the business aviation climate change commitments that we announced at MBAA, and all the work that was highlighted by Pete in his remarks about sustainability, I think the key is that it's an industry effort that you have. And on top of that, we have our own Embraer ESG commitments as well. And so fly net zero by 2050 is the key focus in that regard. And we recognize that there's several pathways to do that. And the first pathway is SAF. And you put your money where your mouth is, right? So you have to go buy it. You have to go access it. You got to fuel your demo fleet like we do with the product, and so do our peers in that regard. So you have to put yourself out there to sort of showcase its capabilities and safety as it relates to those capabilities, and that's happening. We're exploring lots of new pathways in Brazil in terms of the types of fuels and biofuels that you can use to create new technologies. We have our Eco Demonstrator, which is our Ipanema agricultural aircraft that's 100% electrical. The purpose of that is so that we can do deep dives in the innovation of electrification and then apply that to Eve Air Mobility for our advanced air mobility eVTOL solutions. And so we're really all in regards to what we see, both the near-term SAF commitment and then a longer-term commitment in terms of Eve Air Mobility and eVTOL solutions. And as Omer had indicated, I think the future is hybrid and hydrogen and even beyond with the fuel cell characteristics of what our industry propulsion areas can be. It's an all-in effort, and I think it needs to be a global effort. And we have to all do our part to have that sort of coalition attitude in regards to the commitment to a sustainable aviation fuel today. What we're also doing is you have to build the airplane sustainably. And so whether it be your production plants or the product in terms of the interiors of the aircraft. And so we're using recycled plastics from ocean plastics. You're doing billets of combination using Makume gain technologies of bringing parts together that are scraps from the fields and making new ornate materials inside. You use bamboo, you use wool, you use different aspects to the aircraft so that your entire production process and the result that the customer experiences is a sustainable tree of life, not just the fuel. And so that's where we're taking the industry.
As you said, it's all in, and I hope this community realizes as an industry, we're working on making the existing products better, our commitment to sustainable aviation fuel so we can address the product and service today, doing programs that can have an immediate effect and looking at the long terms, like some of the things that Omer talked about. Last topic, and we're going to go very quickly, guys, because we want to get to the
lightning round.
All right, we want to talk about workforce. I mean, you saw it in the video. We would be nowhere without our people, and we have important challenges in this area. I'd like to start with you, Eric.
Sure.
Pilots. You mentioned earlier about pilots and the shortage, but maybe you've also seen some other parts to this.
Yeah, I think that it's a bit of a mixed story on pilots. Everybody's read all the articles, we've seen all the demand. The last Boeing forecast, I think, was 600,000 pilots over the next 20 years is what the demand is. And that doesn't include some of these emerging markets through advanced air mobility and so forth. So there's no question we need a lot of pilots. If you look at some of the statistics on it, if you look from 2012 to 2021, and you exclude student pilots, so you just look at licensed pilots, we've actually been pretty static. It's down a little bit, but it was about 490,000 total pilots. This is the U.S. versus about 170,000 licensed pilots today. So that's the not so good news. The good news is that if you look at student pilot certificates, over that same period of time, we've gone from about 119,000 to 250,000 student pilot licenses in 2021. And most of that increase has occurred really in the last 3 or 4 years. I think the message I would tell you is the market is responding to the demand that's out there. And we've seen a continual escalation in the compensation that pilots are receiving. And, you know, money talks. People follow the money. And so we're seeing a lot more pilots starting training now. Good. And I really do, I feel much more optimistic, you know, now than I perhaps did maybe a year ago.
I think that's a great way to, you know, maybe close the discussion. This is, you know, we've been talking about pilot shortages for many, many years, and to hear that there's a different shining light out there is particularly encouraging. You know, we were worried about where these pilots were going to come from. So thank you, Eric, for everything you do. Maybe just in closing, a few points. Hopefully you all agree with us that we see some very encouraging signs, and they're not, you know, just short term. The demand is coming from many new sources, and we're very hopeful that the investments we're making across the board will continue to bring new services and new capability to the world at large. You know, we owe our success to being able to work together. I think the aviation and the, you know, our community has always been very collaborative in finding solutions, working with the regulators, and we're going to continue to do that. And yes, there are some challenges, but still a very exciting time to be in aviation. The market is the world. You get to work on the most complex problems around with the smartest people, technology, and there's something for everybody, whether you're a technician, a production worker, someone who works in finance or HR, there is a role for everyone in aviation and all people from every walk of life. So hopefully, you know, you got to feel some of that in the discussions that we have today. And so while we're watching, you know, commercial aviation recover, general aviation, business aviation is playing the role of leading the way, and very, very proud to be part of this community with all of you. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Pete? Can we get up? No, we're going to ask a question.
Thank you, Maria. Great job at moderating that panel. I know that the aviation press, most of you are going to join us at the reception tonight, so you have time for some one-on-one questions. But any questions that we can field very quickly from the floor right now? Yes, sir. Mike's coming over to you.
Thanks, Pete. I'm Matt Thurber, AIN. So collectively as an industry, not just Omer, how are we going to build all these advanced new aircraft in such high volumes? We haven't done it yet. The only time we did it was World War II. But can we do it? I mean, can we get away from the customized, hand-built aircraft we're doing today to building thousands and thousands of aircraft?
Michael, why don't you take that one?
I'll be happy to start. Matt, thanks for your question. I think the technologies that are going into the simplified flight characteristics of these aviation products potentially have the solutions that might allow for kit developments. So you'd have regional concepts of operations that are all over the globe, and you're not going to necessarily have to punch through one assembly line thousands of units. The concept behind a lot of the simplified solutions that you're seeing, not only Embraer but others build, have that characteristic that can, through safety and quality, can be done through following standards, very, very focused, deliver a consistent production type certification in a more kit design. And that has the characteristics of how you'd see that, you know, thousands in the sky. We're going to walk before we run. You got to realize this is first mile, last mile when we start. It's not going to be thousands in the sky magically happening. There's just too much at risk to do that. You have to be smart about how we're going to grow this sector. And that's the approach I think the industry needs to take, not just from any one OEM, is to recognize that the reasons things tend to fail is because you go too fast and you sacrifice safety and quality. And this is not a segment you can do that with passengers, especially in a simplified flight solution where you're going to have a lot more autonomous solutions that are going to be working to that future. So I think you'll see regional development, regional capabilities, concept of operations being supported for the first miles and last miles that each of the different OEMs that are in this space are serving in terms of their value proposition before you see the thousands being built at a pace that can be sustained in terms of safety and quality.
Any other questions? We have one over here.
Dave Hughes with Avionics News. How does this industry keep the communications industry from making more inroads on bandwidth? And is this going to happen again as it did with 5G?
Well, I'm going to turn that one over to Phil, but I just want to give you, I just want to give you my perspective, and I know I've listened to administrators say this. We sure as heck better learn from this episode. And it's our job to not let them forget, because we told them this would happen a long time ago, but the processes weren't in place at the FCC for them to understand how safety in aviation is regulated. It just wasn't there. And gosh, we have got to learn, whether it's through legislative action or whether it's just our federal government getting all of the resources to talk to one another, because it for sure will happen again as spectrum becomes even more precious. Phil, you want to touch on that?
I think you nailed it. I'll take a little more conciliatory approach maybe and just say, I think it's put the highlight on the need. So you would hope understanding what happened here will be more proactive going forward. Because actually, once you have, the engineers on each side working together and there's trust there, amazing things can happen. I see Administrator Dixon affirming that. So we just need to learn from this experience and then do the right things going forward.
Got time for one more? Anyone else out there? Okay, well, it's time for the special announcement. And I hope it's not lost on anybody that I've got my buddies here from all the major GA associations, along with our great friend Todd Hopley from AAAE, along with API representative, the American Petroleum Institute, because we have been working on a solution for avgas and getting the lead out of avgas for well over a decade now. The solution has been elusive. It is not an easy problem to solve. We have some promising technology out there, but we've also got a time clock ticking. And we as an industry have to work with our partners to be able to go and plot our own destiny before it is forced upon us. And so I am very proud of the fact that all of these association heads, all of our piston aircraft industry have figured out that we have got to have a public-private partnership with the FAA to be able to plot our destiny and move forward. So I would like to ask the administrator to come on up and talk about this initiative that we're very excited about. Administrator Dixon.
Well, thanks, Pete. Since you've given me the podium, though, I want to thank the last panel. I was really excited to hear the discussion about how exciting a time it is in the aviation and the aerospace industry. And I really do think there's just tremendous opportunities. We've learned so much over the last few years. And one of my leaders a few months ago said about COVID, keep the best and leave the rest. And I know it's good for the soul for us all to be together. But we've learned so much in the journey that we have taken, and now I think there are really limitless opportunities ahead of us. And when it comes to exciting new opportunities in aviation, the announcement that we're making today, I think, is a big part of it. And we're calling it Eagle, which is pretty cool. Pete and I happen to be not only Air Force Academy classmates, but we both flew the finest air superiority fighter in history, still undefeated, the F-15 Eagle. And so Eagle is a joint government industry initiative, and the intent of the program is to safely eliminate leaded aviation fuel by the end of 2030 without impacting the safe and efficient operation of the existing piston engine fleet. Now, as Pete said, this isn't a new issue. It's something that industry has been grappling with for a number of years now. People of a certain age may recall driving in a car that operated on leaded fuel. But lead was eliminated, as we know, decades ago from automotive fuel due to health concerns. But as we know, aviation fuel for piston engine aircraft remains the last kind of leaded-based fuel anywhere in the world. In fact, piston engine aircraft account for the largest source of lead air emissions in the United States. So removing lead from aviation fuel is something that we've been working on for a long time. A couple of examples. In 2011, the FAA established an Unleaded Avgas Transition Aviation Rulemaking Committee. In 2014, the Faa and Industry started the Piston Aviation Fuel Initiative, which we all know as PAFI. And there's been some great work done there. It had the goal to authorize and adopt high-octane unleaded fuels suitable for piston engine airplanes. Well, through the Eagle initiative that we're announcing today, industry and the agency will build off of this foundation of current work. We'll accelerate our actions, investments, and policies to accomplish and make the transition to a lead-free piston engine fleet. Now, to many of you, you may be thinking about Yogi Berra, right? Deja vu all over again. Well, I'm here to tell you that we are at a unique point. We have the resources, the energy, and the will to get this done, and we will get it done. And through this collaborative effort, we will remove more than 350 tons of lead from the atmosphere every year. That's more than the weight of some large high-performance aircraft. How do we do it? Well, specifically, our action plan includes 4 major pillars of work to be completed over the next 8 years, and you see those on the slide in front of us. Now, industry is going to lead the first 2 pillars of activity. The first one is developing the business infrastructure and implementation for unleaded fuels. Industry will work to create an efficient supply chain to transport unleaded fuels from refineries to thousands of airports across our country. We saw a slide of that very precious infrastructure a few minutes ago. And industry will work to make sure that pilots are using these fuels. During the transition and beyond, we will work to maintain aviation safety and airport access. Now, industry is also going to lead the second pillar, supporting research and development of piston engine modifications and or engine retrofits that may be needed for unleaded fuel operations. Now, under this pillar, industry will also work to develop electric or hybrid engine technologies as another path in the transition to a lead-free piston engine fleet. Now, the FAA is going to lead the third and fourth pillars. The third pillar is testing and qualifying of unleaded fuels. Through the PAFI program, we will continue our work to evaluate and test high-octane unleaded fuels and work to authorize lower-octane fuels in the near term. And finally, the fourth pillar involves something that we've talked about quite a bit today, government activity for regulations and policy. We'll follow up EPA rules of lead emissions with needed program support for piston engine modifications, new piston engines that do not require leaded aviation fuel, and fuel components for aviation fuels. Now, on March 16th, the Eagle stakeholders will come together to get this program going. We'll establish an executive director for this initiative and government and industry leads for the respective pillars. The team's actions and progress will be transparent to the aviation community. I know that it's something that we'll be talking about for a long time to come and monitoring our progress. The team's actions, and again, you'll keep flying as you are now. We're going to make this a completely transparent process. Now, as our work progresses, we will make sure that you and your pilot associations are informed about key issues like unleaded fuel development and testing, infrastructure development, supply chain efforts, decisions about engine modifications and retrofits where needed, needed government activities, and assumptions about aviation community costs. And I know that's a huge area of concern, and that's one of the big issues that we all need to work on together. We will work to get every member of the GA community involved so that the transition away from leaded fuel will keep you flying and flying safely. We'll also make sure that the communities that host our airports, including tribal communities, will be intimately involved in these efforts as we move forward. Now, in closing, the FAA's partnership in Eagle is one of many efforts that we're making to ensure that aviation is environmentally sustainable. It's obviously a key White House priority and very important to the future of the industry that we care about so much. It's a safe and practical path to a lead-free aviation future, and we look forward to launching this new initiative with aviation stakeholders to achieve this very important goal. Now, unfortunately, I won't be here to see this through. I think even under the best of circumstances, this is an effort that would have gone past my term anyway. But I am really proud to be here with Pete and with all of you to launch this very important effort. I've got great confidence in the team at the FAA to successfully find the way forward and to help you find the way forward to a lead-free future. Again, collaboration is going to be key, as it always is, for the good of the sector and making sure that we do it safely for aviation and for the public. Thank you.
So, just as we did at NBA base, we have a proclamation that we're going to move forward. For the press, we have a background paper for you and a little bit more explanation here of the proclamation that we are making as industry to work with in our partnership with the FAA and bring in other stakeholders. I just communicated with Patrick Key at EASA yesterday about what this initiative was about and how we're going to move forward. So we will be in collaboration with other regulatory agencies around the planet. But I am so proud of being able to work with my buds all on the industry coalition to put this together. But also, I really have to compliment, I mentioned how we work together on the Net Zero by 50 on turbine aviation, to be able to get all the piston manufacturers together, not only on the airframe side, but on the engine side, and then be able to have our fuel providers all be with us together in this effort is truly phenomenal. And I really think we will find and be able to meet success. We've got a stake in the ground now, and we've got to move forward. So I'd like to ask the administrator to stand right in the middle on ground floor level. We're going to have the associations on either side. We're going to put you down here, okay, sir. And then the piston OEMs, engine OEMs, and fuel providers, if you come on up and be on the stage level behind the administrator. Jack Pelton sends his regrets. He had an emergency that came up yesterday. Lucina, who's been at every AirVenture since AirVenture started, is here representing EAA. Okay, GAMA board. Now I got to make you all work, so you're going to get on the bus and head back to the hotel for our board meeting.